final panel of the day, and we are very pleased and proud to be hosting Andrew Leigh, the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities, Treasury and Employment. Andrew is very much the Renaissance man of Australian politics. He, that was very much, Assistant Minister is his day job. He is a triathlete. He's written a gazillion books. He has his own podcast. I'm just getting tired reciting all these things. I also, many years ago, not that many years ago, a few years ago, had the pleasure of editing one of Andrew's books. And editing one of Andrew's books is a bit like taking a tour of his brain. And a tour of Andrew's brain is a bit like, just imagine a Saturday afternoon in your favourite bookshop with enormous amounts of information, wonderful kind of stories and anecdotes. And so it is a real pleasure, not just to have Andrew here, but to sit with him and have a fireside chat. We don't have a fireside, Andrew, but we will have a chat. So I invite Andrew Leigh. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Leigh.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. That was really generous. I'm glad we have a waterside chat rather than a fireside chat here with these wonderful Bloomberg aquariums.
So I want you to put your one of your former hats on, Professor of Economics at the Australian National University, because we wanted to talk today about openness and globalization and open borders and the value of those things. So let's start with kind of 101. Why is openness important for prosperity, not just for the world, but also for Australia?
So most of us in this room don't cut our own hair, fix our own cars, or grow our own food. We rely on the principle of comparative advantage to focus on the things we do well, and we buy the other things in from people in society. And that principle that holds up for individuals in a modern economy holds up too for medium-sized countries in a global economy. If you're a country of 1 billion people, you can hope to do everything. If you're a country that comprises 0.3% of the global population, then you can't. You need to specialise on what you do best. So trade has been one of the central drivers of prosperity. And actually, if you look at Australian history, the moments on which we have been fastest growing are the moments where we've been most open. The end of the 19th century, the end of the 20th century, the Australian economy performed much better than we did in that closed period of the interwar era.
So why then? I mean, there is now, everyone's talking about, just today and yesterday, de-risking, decoupling, high fences around technology, friendshoring, industry policy, all those things. Do you think it's just talk, or are we actually seeing that starting to happen?
No, it's certainly a risk. I mean, it's been a risk for a while with the rise of populism, which has tapped into a deep-seated fear of foreigners. Don't forget that for the vast majority of human history, we lived in groups of about 150, where being frightened or fierce towards foreigners was a rational strategy. It's only with the rise of modern cities that engagement with people who aren't similar to us has turned out to be really good economically. That populist trend has also tapped into other challenges that have gone on in the global economy. We've seen the rise of the EU adjusting state aid rules, the Made in China policy, the Make in India policy, and the Inflation Reduction Act, are all reflecting a desire to move away to some degree from the open rules-based international order. And again, that trend is most dangerous to a medium-sized economy. An economy of hundreds of millions of people or billions of people can afford to do much more onshore. An economy like Australia's is most a threat from a world which splits and becomes hostile towards the open trading regime that's been a key source of our prosperity.
It says something about the place we're in at the moment, that what's being seen as one of the most important speeches by a US official on the global economy was delivered by the National Security Advisor, right? By Jake Sullivan. And the speech focused very much on promoting national economic resilience and protecting critical technology. This is where we got the kind of high fences terminology from. What does that mean for the global economy, and what does it mean for Australia?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One is around the subsidising of manufacturing, the return of industrial policy, and the other is around securing critical mineral supply chains. I think it's really important for us to bear in mind as we go through the biggest energy transition in Australian history that the climate doesn't care who builds batteries. I drive a Chinese-made Tesla. That is a vehicle which would have been significantly more expensive if China was unable to get access to the raw materials in order to build the vehicle. But as a result of driving an electric vehicle, my household emissions are lower than they would otherwise be. Critical minerals are heavily traded. The United States imports 80% of critical minerals. The European Union imports 98% of critical minerals. And I worry very much, Anthony, about a world in which we cut off the supply chains for critical minerals, because that's only going to make the clean tech transition more expensive. So I can understand why Indonesia banned exports of nickel ore in 2014, but a consequence of that has been to make it more challenging for other countries to get the reliable supply chains. And reliability is really key here. It was a point that Helen made earlier. If you're making long-term investments, you need the confidence that you're going to be able to secure those supply chains. And I worry in recent years that some of the developments that we've seen from both developed and developing countries imperil the reliability that firms need to make these long-term clean tech investments, which are critical to decarbonising the planet.
There is a bit of a gap between the rhetoric and the reality. Obviously one of the key reasons we've been talking about these kind of changes in international trading environment, protecting technology, is China. Yet this morning we heard that lithium, seen as a critical technology, Australia's lithium sales to China, are continuing to grow. Australia's trade with China record levels this year. So is there a bit of a gap? There's a lot of talk, but is it not actually translating into reality? The business is just going on regardless.
Australia's prosperity has been built in large part in our economic engagement with China. It is our chief source of chief destination for our exports, the chief source of our imports. It was before the pandemic the major source of international tourists and international students. Australia is enmeshed with the Chinese economy in the same way that we're enmeshed with the UK economy for the first half of the 20th century and the US economy for the second half of the 20th century. And we have an interest in ensuring that China plays a part in decarbonisation. China's access to materials that allow them to build low-cost batteries, low-cost solar panels, low-cost electric vehicles ensures that we get those technologies, but also that other countries get access to those technologies as well. It is a good thing for the Great Barrier Reef that fewer Chinese citizens will be driving petrol vehicle cars in a decade's time, and more will be driving electric vehicles. Again, not only does the climate not care who builds batteries, the climate doesn't care where the emissions are being produced.
Another issue, and you mentioned it already, that was highlighted in Jake Sullivan's speech was industry policy, and we've seen that which suddenly seems to be back in fashion in Western economies, highlighted in particular by the massive US Inflation Reduction Act. What does that mean for Australia? How do we compete with bigger economies that have much bigger levers to pull when it comes to industry policy? And what does it mean for things like, the global competition for talent?
Yeah, I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge challenge for many of us economists. Albert and I were talking about this when we met in Canberra recently. One of the shifts is in seeing the growth of manufacturing as being essential to a high-functioning economy. And there's certainly good manufacturing jobs to be had, But I think we want to be careful about the misplaced nostalgia that says you can simply bring back the economy of the 1950s. Increasingly now, factories are jobless, and where they have workers, they are highly skilled workers because the machines are incredibly expensive. And the old story that manufacturing jobs always paid better than services jobs has now ceased to be true. So in the United States, manufacturing jobs pay 5% less on average than services jobs. The story that you've got to have a strong manufacturing sector also doesn't hold true as a rule. Yes, some countries have prospered through manufacturing, think Germany. Other countries like Australia with smaller manufacturing sectors have also prospered well. If you plot across the last 30 years, OECD countries' growth versus the size of the manufacturing sector, there's no relationship. So there's paths to prosperity through manufacturing, there's paths to prosperity outside manufacturing. And we need to be very careful about the notion that only manufacturing is the only way of generating good jobs, or indeed that in the United States context, that there is some possibility of a return to the car manufacturing structure of Detroit of the 1950s. That's just not how cars are made these days. Tesla factories have, in the United States, have very few workers, and that's increasingly the case for many other forms of manufacturing.
And what about that global competition for talent? It's often said that the Inflation Reduction Act will see, many more kind of highly skilled, talented people going to the US. How do we compete in that environment? We're a nice place to live, but what more can we offer?
Yeah, I mean, migration has always been critical to Australian prosperity, and one of the things we've done really well, I think, as you know better than anyone in the room, Anthony, is ensuring that our immigration system is tailored to the macroeconomy. So, as our Australian unemployment has gone up at times, we've scaled back on migration, and that's ensured that public support for migration is much stronger here than it is in Europe, for example. We're looking at migration settings to ensure we've got them right, to ensure that the points system is kept up to date, to make sure that people aren't bringing in workers who would otherwise supplant Australian workers, but instead bringing in workers who are going to be creating new opportunities for Australians. Those settings haven't been well recalibrated post-pandemic, and a big task for Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles as Home Affairs and Immigration Ministers, respectively, is to ensure we get that right. The United States has an economy which is a magnet for talent. You see a lot of Silicon Valley firms started by migrants, but its migration settings haven't always been as good as I think many American businesses would like them to be.
Geopolitics is not the only reason why the world seems to be stepping back from globalization. I mean, COVID clearly had an impact, but also there's that sense that there are states in the system, but also segments of our own populations that didn't see the benefits of globalization. Whether that was a perception, whether it's true, you can have an argument about it, but clearly there's that sense that, this globalization thing happened and it didn't improve my life. If we're talking about, segments of our populations, not just in Australia, in Europe, in the US, but also states in the global south. So what's the argument to be made to those states and to those segments of our own populations who seem to have lost faith in a world of open markets?
Well, the domestic context. I mean, I'm in favour of openness because I'm a social democrat. I believe we want to raise living standards, and openness is a great way of doing that. I'm also a social democrat because I believe in openness. I don't think you can support an open economy without recognising that that has distributional consequences, and it's really important that the gains are well shared. When the Whitlam government cut all tariffs by 25% in 1973, they were also aware of the need to support workers who were affected by those changes. The steel plan, the car plan, the textile plan, pursued under the Hawke governments as tariffs came down, were a reflection of that philosophy. But ultimately, the story to countries in our region would be look at the tiger economies, look at the tiger cub economies. The story of countries in our region that have done best is that they've prospered most at times of openness when they pursued engagement with the region. And the increasing engagement through the Asia Pacific region is one of the notable trends in recent decades. It's important that Australia is a part of that. Certainly, it's great to have Richard here. ANZ has been one of our best financial institutions when it's come to engaging with the region. And we need more Australian firms doing that outreach and recognising the benefits of engaging with the region. Nicholas Moore's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy is part of thinking through all of the dimensions of that. What does it mean for language skills? What does it mean for visas? What does it mean for what our diplomats are doing offshore? How do we engage in a full court press to ensure that we get the gains from Asia prospering, but also that we engage there. I'll be attending the OECD meetings in Vietnam in a couple of weeks, and one of the reasons that I'm going over there is to support Indonesia's bid to be a full member of the OECD, which I think would be great for Indonesia and great for the OECD.
And I mean, all of this is related also to the thing that we the concept we've thrown around a lot, the rules-based order. And there's lots of discussion about, well, whose rules, what rules. It's a term that's been appropriated by, the geostrategic community, geostrategic scholars, even though it actually had its origins amongst international economists. You can have it back, actually. And inevitably, when we talk about the rules-based economy, the rules-based order, China comes up. But it's not just China that is unhappy with the rules. Do you think the rules-based order needs to change if we are to preserve the benefits that it clearly does provide?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about, Anthony, the issues we were discussing before around access to critical mineral supply chains and ensuring that we aren't breaking the world into pockets of supply chains, then you need a set of rules to fall back on as to when it's appropriate to, say, constrain exports. CPTPP doesn't provide that. RCEP doesn't provide that. Ideally, that would be provided by the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution mechanism, but almost a decade ago now, the Trump administration ceased appointing judges ceased supporting judges to be appointed to the Dispute Resolutions Review Panel, and that system is effectively now broken because the Biden administration has maintained that policy. That's something that a big country can live with, but a medium-sized economy suffers greatly when the rules-based international order breaks down. So for me, it would be about how do we revitalise the World Trade Organization, not just so it's back where it was, but so it's operating even better and ensuring that we get that resilience in the system, the ability of firms to ensure that they have strong supply chains, and the ability of firms to also be able to adapt if the technology changes. Sure, lithium batteries are doing very well now. What if sodium suddenly comes on stream? You don't want a set of rules, norms set up within countries based on a single technology. You want countries to be able to import and export as the technology and the economy shifts. And WTO reforms should be at the heart of that.
I mean, there is, and coming back to kind of China and the US, whether it's rhetoric, whether it's reality, clearly there is some movement there in terms of a gap or some distancing between those two economies and companies, not just American companies and Chinese companies, but also European companies. And now you are now, whether it's decoupling or de-risking, there is some distance being put. Richard Yatsenga made the important point. How do you decouple from a country whose economy represents, such a large percentage of the kind of the global economy? I mean, is there a compromise there? Is there a sensible distance, or is this all heading to a bad place?
Yes, it's hard to imagine what it would be like to walk through a Walmart in the United States, which imported nothing from China. For all of the rhetoric, there is still millions of made in China stickers through American homes, as there are through Australian homes. And that has brought prosperity to both countries. It's been a reason why the pay packets of American workers have gone further. It's been a reason why hundreds of millions of Chinese have found their way out of poverty. That engagement is in the interests of both those countries. It's also in the interests of the world. A country which is cut off from the World Trading Order is a country which has lower incentives to behave in a positive, constructive way in the rules-based international order. We're speaking at the day after Leigh was released from China. I think that's a terrific development, and we have seen the removal of some of the trade barriers that affected Australian exports into China. At the same time, the Australian government's maintained its stance on a range of human rights issues, on a range of issues around international law. I think we are able to walk that tightrope. I wouldn't pretend that it isn't a more challenging exercise than perhaps a couple of decades ago, but it is. There's no future for Australia in which the Chinese economy doesn't remain critical. So we need to be part of that constructive conversation, ensuring that a peaceful rules-based international order has been maintained.
A final question, Andrew. At the heart of this forum, Asia Briefing Live event yesterday and today, is this dual question of how does Australia secure its security and its prosperity? We've heard a lot about security. We heard the Minister for Defence yesterday. He ended the day yesterday for us talking about how Australia will secure itself. So here's an opportunity for you to talk about, what does Australia need to do to secure its prosperity?
So my father, Michael Leigh, was part of a generation of post-war scholars who engaged with the region. He's a researcher who worked in Malaysia and Indonesia and researched on Malaysia through the course of his career. And I remember him saying to me, particularly in the 1950s, that scholars were doing two things. They were wanting to learn about the region through, you think about Herb Feith setting up the Australian volunteering abroad programs, or Jamie Mackey drafting the pamphlet Control or Calabar about the White Australia policy. So they were wanting Australia to be in the region, but they were also recognising that the region saw Australia's policies. So whether that is tackling racial discrimination, ensuring that we've got more Asian Australians represented in Australian public life, we have too few Asian Australians in the judiciary in particular, but also too few in the public service. That sends a powerful signal to the region about who we are. Just as the removal of the White Australia policy was critical for that generation, so too ensuring the full inclusion of Asian Australians in our public life goes hand in hand with our international diplomacy. And that international diplomacy needs to be enthusiastic. It makes little sense that we have so much of our investment going into the Anglosphere, so little in relative terms going into our region. And one of the things that trade tensions with China has meant is more diversification of supply chains through other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. I think that's been a healthy development. It's encouraged Australian firms to not just see engaging with Asia as meaning engaging with China, but also to recognise the importance of Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, India, and many other economies in our region. This is, for me, part of Australia recognising that who we are is a vibrant multicultural democracy and taking those values into our public engagement in the region.
Andrew, we'll have to wrap it up there. It's been great to have to take another stroll through your brain, and a real pleasure to have you. Please join me in thanking Andrew Leigh.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you.